Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And first of all, thank you very much to the NDA and to Quality Deer Management Association, Brian in particular, whom I've had a great deal of engagement with over the last little while, for inviting me here. I don't say that simply because it's a pleasure in general to be invited to speak. I say it also because of the things I've heard today, things I didn't realize before with respect to how this is developing and why it developed. Insights that make me believe that this could be an extraordinarily powerful and positive movement for wildlife conservation in the United States of America and in Canada. And making a significant contribution to wildlife conservation in our two countries means that you make a contribution to the absolute bedrock of the hunting tradition. There are, for all intents and purposes, more hunters in our two countries than in most all other countries in the world combined. Most people in Canada and the United States don't realize how significant this activity still is. And in fact, I think perhaps a great many hunters don't realize it either. We should, but we don't necessarily. I'm glad to be here. I think King Louis XVI would be very proud if he could see the place named after him. And I suspect Lewis and Clark find a lot of change from the time when they met here, began their historic journey. Much has changed throughout the world. What I am particularly delighted by is that finally it appears that the Virginia deer, which is really the anglicized name for the whitetail, and its cousins, the mule deer and blacktail, may finally get the thanks they deserve. For provisioning over such a long period of time our hearts, our tables, and our traditions. I don't find it at all strange to use such language. There are some in our movement who are afraid to use such language, that we ought to be grateful to these creatures. But I am not one of those. I have no fear of such language. It is exactly how I feel. And I would wager that if we collectively, in our industries, in our lives, in our experiences and discussions with friends and neighbors, expressed our respect for these wild others more often and in better ways, we would probably find that the status of hunters would be elevated even more than it is. It's hard to believe when we look at white-tailed deer today and their cousins that at one time they were courted by extinction. It's absolutely amazing, isn't it, to think with the numbers of white-tailed deer that we have on this continent today, that there was a time, only 100 years ago, when that animal could have literally disappeared. Think about it. Because in thinking about it, I think we have some idea of how far we have come. We have taken, over that long period of time, perhaps more from that animal than we have given. And I think it is time to change that, as you obviously do. Therefore, when I say thank you for having me, it's to say thank you as well for what you're doing. We cannot have enough of such efforts. We need more of this. We need more commitment. We need more drive, more determination. And for those in the room who may feel that you're always being asked to give more, I simply tell you to get used to it. It's the way life is. It's always those who give who are asked to give more. That's how life works. But we do live in a time of great challenge. A huge challenge. We know that the only way to preserve our traditions, our economies, our businesses, our culture in this regard, is to keep wildlife with us. There's no other solution to this equation. There's no other way to describe it. There's no other way to integrate it. It's very simple. We have them or we don't. And if we have them, we have so many options. If we don't have them, we have none. It is not us who matter so much in one sense. It is them. But this time of great challenge is becoming ever more complicated. We are grateful for the public support that we have. There's no question that every poll that we take over the last 30 years has indicated that we have extraordinary support from the public in the United States and Canada. I would like to ask you, why do you think that's the case? Because if there's one thing I know about human history, and I am enamored with the study of history, is that we as human beings have a belief in what I call this fallacy of linear expectation. We expect that things will gradually change over time, and that we will have an opportunity to predict the changes that are coming, and time enough to deal with them. Well, I'll simply remark two things: the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Arab Spring. There is no linear expectation that's really warranted. And so I return again and again to this question of why do 80% of the people in this country support the 6% of us who undertake an activity that leads to the willful death of a beautiful creature. Some say, let sleeping deer lie. Couldn't resist it. Don't worry about it, let's just take the good news and run. We're obviously doing the right things. But I know there was a time in this country when hunting was not supported to that extent. The zenith of support, the high point of hunting in the United States of America occurred in the last part of the 19th century and the early part of the 20th. Now, I know there are people here involved in business, and I know there are people involved in the publishing industry, and I know there are people probably associated with television and so on and so forth. But I can tell you by any measure of social discussion, the great peak of agitation, the great peak of accomplishment, the great pinnacle of our prestige and identity occurred in the last part of the 19th and the early part of the 20th century. It's not that we haven't done well since, but by any measure, examine the wave of publications, the amount of agitation, the political efforts that we made, the changes that we brought, the whole idea of rescuing wildlife when it was in such absolute crisis across this vast continent. We could only do that because we were driving with a force behind us that would not be stopped. And I ask myself, what was it that helped shape this hunter movement? What gave us the legitimacy to have this influence? It did not happen by accident. And I think knowing this past is important for our future. And I believe there were two factors. The first was when unexpectedly this small fledgling nation won the War of Independence. Before that, almost every American still looked to Britain as the ideal. But after that point, the issue became how to define Americanism, how to define your nation, how to define your culture. And in searching for that, the image of the capable, independent citizen, capable as a marksman, capable of living off the land, capable of exploring places that were wild and potentially dangerous, people who could procure for themselves what they needed to live, that image became critical to the idea of America. The second issue was the rise of the study of natural history. The notion that we would understand the natural world and understand the animals that lived in it became paramount in Europe, and they captured that movement and looked down on nations that did not know it. Well, who in this nation was best positioned to talk about the natural world? Who in this nation was best positioned to become the natural historians who would be honored, respected, believed in? It was the hunters of America. They already knew the haunts of the quarry. They already knew the animals themselves. They knew geography. They knew how the land worked. And out of that arose the individuals such as John James Audubon and Theodore Roosevelt, two names that this country will never forget, two names that the world remembers, who symbolized people who could understand wildlife and be knowledgeable and speak on its behalf. And out of that surfaced the one most important aspect that as hunters we need to protect. The individuals who drove that movement at that time, who proved themselves so capable, who proved themselves so knowledgeable, they tied this issue of hunting to the idea of citizenship. And they spoke on behalf of the natural resources of this nation, not just about their hunting trips, nor just about the animals they pursued. They spoke about the natural resources of your nation and said, in believing Roosevelt, that no one had the right to squander them. We became respected because we spoke for everything. We became respected because we spoke for our country. We became respected because we did not boil this issue of hunting down into our personal glorification. And I don't have to tell any of you in this audience how much of that has happened in recent decades. It is a dangerous path. When Roosevelt would honor the animals he pursued, we now seek to honor those who pursue them. when Roosevelt would honor the hunt, the experience, the days of field, the effort, the work, the hardship, the chance, the risk, so many times we wish to glorify the death of a creature. We need, as successful as we have been, to reposition ourselves as we go forward. We need to do exactly what you are trying to do and we're trying to do in that room this afternoon. We need to stand up as individuals who hunt and invite those who do not to stand for the animals themselves, for the lands that they require, and to ensure that the benefits of that flow to all of us, those who hunt, and those who don't, and those who never will. Along this way, we have a great task, exciting task, a task that matches the scale of what Roosevelt and Grinnell, Pinchot, and Mahoney, and all of those took on, a scale of proportion that only the strong can achieve. We have to destroy some myths along the way. Too many people in your country and in Canada and around the world believe that wildlife exists by accident. This is where this whole notion comes from, that if you just leave them alone, everything will be fine. This is not how it works. We cannot leave them alone anymore. They exist by virtue of what we do, just as the rescue of deer from the brink of extinction to the millions of today happened by virtue of what we did. Yet in the public mind, there floats this notion that if we just step aside, all will be well. We have a myth in society that hunting is a frivolous thing. A frivolous thing. That we simply go out there and shoot at these sentient creatures as though they're cardboard cutouts. That we don't feel for them. That we don't care for them. That we don't really work for them. Hunting is something that 16 million people every year in our two countries undertake as a lawful activity. 16 million of us. It's not a sideshow, it's not frivolous. We do it for a whole complex series of reasons. Because it is in us to do it. Because it makes us feel extraordinary. Because the time out there finally gives us a sense of freedom from a world that is all chains and balls that we can shed for the days or weeks that we can undertake this activity. We do it so that we become alive. We smell the wind. We know the direction of that wind makes a difference as to whether we will be successful or not. We understand what weather is coming and where it is going. We know how to read sign. We leave behind all of this. We harvest animals. We kill them. We kill them, and then we butcher them, and then we eat them. There is nothing frivolous in any of that. But let us be honest. We have helped fuel such notions. And then, of course, there are people who say that conservation is a simple thing. That is why you can have a conversation with people and they talk about conservation as though anyone can basically solve the problems. Conservation. Conservation is a spider's web of politics, science, human culture, tradition, our love of animals, our fear of death, all of those things mashed together. We have to understand the land. We have to understand individual species. We have to understand how the species interact. We have to understand how we can harvest, what level we can harvest, which we can take out, how long can we leave, how many animals can a land support. And people think it's easy. Who gave them this notion? And of course our politicians follow these attitudes. And unless we convince them otherwise, they will continue to think this way. Until we make them understand that in rooms like this room, there are people who are knowledgeable, who are willing to give their lives, their time, their money, their effort, their business acumen, till they realize that it takes that in many places, every day, every hour of every day, to keep wildlife with us. Until they understand that, they will think this conservation business is a sideshow. And you know what will happen as a result of that? Well, I'll tell you. Look at the budgets that are spent on it in this country, or in Canada. And that'll give you an idea of what happens. This is not a priority for the government here. It is not a priority for the government in Canada. And unless we make it so, it will never be. And then we have the notion in our own community that if we simply do things as we used to do them, but do them a little better, all will be fine. Well, that day is gone, ladies and gentlemen. This year, we fought the decision by the European Parliament to refuse the importation of seals and seal products. We have 7.2 million harp seals off the coast of Newfoundland. 7.2 million. And they basically shut down all harvest of those animals. They're shot now, they're not clubbed, and we use the pelts, the meat, etc. Doesn't matter. So the World Trade Organization, a business organization, was asked to rule on this decision. And talking about unexpected outcomes, they came back and said, you know what, the European Union was right in their decision. You know why? Because it defended the public morality. They didn't define what that was. They simply said the public morality trumps everything. Well, I don't have to tell you where that leads. That leads to the closing of hunting in Africa for iconic species first. That leads to the notion that no matter how abundant wildlife is, you're not going to be able to harvest it. And while that's not affecting us in the United States and Canada right now, that's where the world is headed. Our problems are that there are not enough of you. That's the basic problem we have. There aren't enough of you. And I don't just mean you who hunt. There just aren't enough people who care. And who care enough to do something for wildlife. Of the ones that do care, we need a better understanding of just what it takes to keep wildlife with us, the complicated nature of it. And we've got to stop being divided in this community if we are going to have any chance of keeping wildlife with us in the future. We have 7 billion people in the world, ladies and gentlemen. It is moving on to 8 and it's moving on to 9. Your country is changing drastically. Canada is changing drastically. Now, we have lived through such change before, but we came out of it strong because we developed strategies to deal with it. And we need to do so again. That is why I was so pleased to sit in the room today and understand more clearly what you are trying to do. Because this, what you were doing, this is a replicate. As though a seed landed from 100 years ago and sprouted, a seed thrown from the altar of the Boone and Crocker Club or Roosevelt's discussions in the White House, or a seed that fell, exploded, and gave rise to this. There is an unbroken chain from here all the way back to there. And if we do things right, there will be seeds that will be thrown from here to raise a new crop 25 or 50 or 100 years from now. To get there, we have to tell our story. And we have to tell our story in different ways than we have been telling it. We have to tell our story to the broad public of this country. And we have to tell our story to the political elites of this country. In every one of our enterprises, we can afford to take a little more risk. Those who own a business, those who publish a magazine, those who have a television show, we can all afford to take a little more risk and to tell the story as it should be told. The North American recovery of wildlife is a miracle. We were at the brink of losing white-tailed deer, pronghorn antelope, elk, turkey, wood duck, Canada geese, black bear, mountain lion, on and on and on. Every single one of them, think about this, every single one of them would have been on the endangered species list had we had it at that time. And today, we have wildlife teeming on this continent, despite all the changes in human population, despite all the changes in agriculture, despite all the changes in land use patterns generally, despite all the problems that we recognize, we still have a huge number of wild creatures with us, and we have a hunting industry that is of extraordinary dimension. And we still have, in the hunting world, 16 million. If we add anglers, we have somewhere between 35 and 40 million of us who every year can and do take part in the harvest of wildlife. There is not another place in the entire world that can lay claim to this. We need not be boastful about it. We need not pretend we did it all ourselves. We need not pretend that we are the only ones who have ideas, but we can honestly say that we led this charge, and we never let our guard down. Now we are 6%. Now, how do we find a way to convince the rest of the public that what we do really matters? There are many ways I can think of, but many of them align with putting ourselves in the mainstream of society. I don't dream of a day when hunting is on this side, over here, outside the main discussions. I want hunting brought into the middle of the discussions in society. I don't want us running away from debates. I want us in the middle. I do not want us just talking about things that matter to my hunting experience. I want us talking for wildlife everywhere. I want the hunting movement to talk about animal welfare, because we ought to care how animals are treated. An old man said to me one time, he said, "My son, we're here to kill them, not to hurt them." We need to stand up and not be satisfied of the position we have. And I think one of the ways to do this is to talk about the original reason why human beings hunted in the first place, the issue of meat. We have, as I said, about 35 to 40 million people in Canada and the United States who hunt and fish each year. I want you to just think for a few seconds about the scale of that wild harvest. We take this for granted, so I'm asking you to please think about this. 35 to 40 million people who are harvesting things from the size of moose all the way down to small fish. And you think about the scale of that offtake. We don't damage the environment. We have paid more than our share to protect it. And then we go out and we harvest this wild food. Now let's say that 40 million people share that food with 4 people in their family or friends. That's 160 million people who all of a sudden are tasting wild, free, organic, healthy food captured by people who have the knowledge and capacity to harvest it. Between our two countries, with 350 million or so people, that means that just with that number of sharing it with 4, we have touched nearly 1 in 2 Canadians and Americans. Now let's think about what it's worth. Let's think about those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds of pure, nutritious food that are captured every single year in our two countries. Well, we propose to do this. I am proposing a study to actually evaluate the entire offtake by recreational hunting and angling in Canada and the United States. I am proposing that we assess and establish the biomass of that offtake, how many millions of pounds or kilograms we actually harvest. Proposing that we then determine, using real economic models, real science, what the economic value of that food is. And then I'm proposing that we figure out what its nutritional impact is in our two countries. And then we're going to ask the question, what if the 40 million of us didn't do this? How would that food be replaced? And at what cost to society would that be? We already know that the pursuit of wild or organic food, safe food, has become an absolute priority for people in this country and in Canada and around the world. So why do we not try and find a way to move in that same current, and at the same time suddenly shock them with the absolutely unbelievable scale of this harvest by people like you and I. So they will understand that what we do is not frivolous, so that they will understand that the efforts we have made for generations now gives to this country and to Canada a reservoir of food that one day may prove very, very critical indeed. The entire world is concerned with food security. We may not have started out to build the North American model so that we would have food security. But I can tell you one of the benefits that has not been talked about is the fact that we have done just that. And if we as hunters and anglers, in our sharing of this food, are touching half of the people who live in our two countries, and if we are responsible, as we can show we have been, for preserving the lands and waters so they remain productive and can produce this food, must they not look upon us in a somewhat different way? And then when we show them that it is theirs too, they can hunt and fish, we leave it open. It's opportunity for all. The system we created here means anyone can have access. That they too can have this. Either they befriend one of us, or they learn from one of us, and they too can have it. Because how else do we get the young mother who raises children by herself in an urban environment to care for a piece of land that is far away? How do we explain that there is a real value in what we do to her? And how do we get our political elites to suddenly understand that there's more to this? That we are talking about a basic human requirement that we, through thoughtful action for over 100 years, have managed to preserve for our two countries. And then I ask you, what is the argument against this? What will the argument be against this? That it is somehow improper to try to have the best, most nutritious, healthiest food for your family that you can possibly get? Is that what society is going to tell the 40 million of us? There are organizations in this room that have already stepped up to support this idea. And we'll be talking a little bit more about this tomorrow at lunch. I raise it here to thank them quietly. They will be thanked more publicly tomorrow. But also as an example of something that we can do that has never been done. In 125 years since we established this movement, we have never done this. And what that says to me is that when we think about conservation, when we think about wildlife, and when we think about hunting, just as everyone was doing today in that room, we can suddenly come up with ideas that, regardless of how big our challenges are, ideas that will make a difference. I predict that there will be a lot of people interested when they see the scale of this. And it is my hope that a lot of people, when we communicate this, will understand that that land and those waters are as sacred to us as to any Native American culture or any human culture that ever existed. That we too, just like the hunter-naturalist, the hunter-citizen of the late 19th century, we can lead a social movement to explain to people that while there are many reasons for why we hunt, one of them is to give us nutrition. One of them is to honor those animals whose lives we take by demonstrating the enormous benefit that their death has brought not just to us, but to our families and to our friends. This is the road to prestige, ladies and gentlemen. This is the road to influence. And this is the road that ultimately will protect wildlife for everyone. No silver bullet, but one more attempt that came from the seeds of Roosevelt and Grinnell and Audubon and Hornaday that took 100 years to sprout. Do not hold back on what you are forming here. It will grow and it will become a force to be reckoned with. Look at the statistic that says too few are involved and simply say you're going to change it. Just like Roosevelt said, it doesn't matter if they're all disappearing, we're going to save them all. And we pretty much did.